The next day, Speed 2.0 began to call itself Turbo after it realized the ability of the same name was actually called something else, Primus. Allie had somehow obtained its body back. Sunshine, the combined morphinism Turbo created, began to assist it. Turbo, Allie, and Trace later left to find out what the Diomorphs were. Trace uses Alternator to become a Deoxys, using the DNA sample of a fallen angel. Turbo used its temporary evolution skill to turn Allie into an Alolan Raichu. In Plasma Town, Speed and Sylvia found a female Kirlia named Carly, who was one of the tournament champions. For some reason, the name Alan came into Carly's head as soon as she saw Speed. Carly later said to Speed that she had been looking for him because a Jolteon similar to him was constantly appearing in her dreams, and she believed it meant something, especially because some of her friends were having the same type of dream. Unbeknownst to Carly, these dreams occurred because she and her friends were the same Pokemon Speed from the original timeline lived with when he broke up with Stella. While Speed was talking to Carly, Trace was defeated in battle and was dragged to the inside of the Deomorph's spawning tower by Albert. Meanwhile, Solar Flare, and Fluffy were looking for the light orbs using Megaton Reprime. Speed had left it behind in the treehouse's warehouse, and Solar told Solar Flare to take it. Solar knew how to pilot the armor because in his timeline he took Speed's place to contain the Berserkers after he was killed. The memory path had destabilized and its barrier began to shatter, likely a result of Turbo's actions while he was inside it. Trace had woken up inside the Deomorph Tower and was greeted by Albert. Albert's look heavily resembled Deoxys because he had just absorbed Trace's Deoxys DNA sample. Albert told Trace that his intentions were not what they seemed to be. Albert had actually been trying to find a way to get rid of the Berserkers for good, and soon found it. Albert found out about the amorphisms that resided in Category 3 Berserkers. With this knowledge, Albert used a light orb on the Deomorph Tower to make it be able to transmit a signal that would permanently put Category 3 amorphisms into a dormant state. An action that would effectively cure its hosts because the amorphisms would be permanently inactive. Albert knew using Deomorphs for this feat was dangerous, but their abilities gave him the best odds for his plan to succeed. However, this plan could not yet be put into work because Albert required Primus full power, something that only Speed was able to harness. As Albert was explaining his plan to Trace, Shade the Absol, who had been infected by an amorphism that he enhanced with Gray's technology, attacked the tower with the power of his Berserker ability and the Rayquaza scale. This scale turned Shade into a huge monster that easily wiped out every Pokemon in the area. Shade caught Trace and Albert in this form as soon as Albert finished his talk. Shade was there to absorb a certain Pokemon who he knew was eventually going to come to this location. That Pokemon was Solar Flare. Shade wanted to absorb Solar Flare to obtain a reality warping ability that Shade would use to twist the world as he wished. Shade was able to learn this from the memories of another Category 3 Berserker he had absorbed. With Trace caught, Shade took the Alternator. Before Shade finished off Trace and Albert, Allie, who was still using Turbo, managed to fend Shade off for now. Allie freed Trace and Albert as well, despite his initial hesitation. Shade soon used the Alternator to become a modified Rayquaza and quickly attacked. Shade's attack made it absorb the tower alongside the light orb within it, ruining Albert's plan. Shade became a Deomorph due to the absorption of the tower. Elsewhere, Solar Flare managed to obtain all of the light orbs with the exception of the one Shade absorbed. Solar Flare had the slight feeling that he might have to fight to get this one. Meanwhile, Speed was in a friendly fight with Carly as Sylvia watched it. Soon after the battle ended, an armor controlled by Turbo got to Speed's location. Turbo asked for Speed to join the battle, and he agreed to help. Before Speed took the armor, he gave Sylvia a chance to be his girlfriend as well, because Lazuli was okay with it. Solar Flare soon got to the location Shade was in. Solar Flare was able to put up a fight long enough for the alternator to time out. As soon as it did, Albert came to cut off the arm the alternator was on. Now that Shade was unable to use the alternator's power, Albert attempted to take the light orb Shade had absorbed, but Shade quickly recovered and transformed into a Deoxys-like monster that caught Albert and Solar Flare. Speed quickly came in and freed Solar Flare, who he was able to recognize, but left the explanations for later. The armor Turbo was remotely controlling soon joined as well. Shade later warped into a location from a faraway continent along with Speed, the armor Turbo was controlling, Solar Flare, and Albert. Shade had managed to absorb Solar Flare's armor right before the warp. Shade had completely frozen after the warp because his Deomorph side had taken over and began to learn about his abilities. Solar Flare and Solar explained to Speed what they were doing. After Speed was updated, the team planned to enter the memory path and take advantage of the fracture in the barrier to reach Shade's section and separate his amorphinism from him in order to get rid of his absorption ability. This plan was devised because they were going to be absorbed if they were to obtain the light orb directly. If this plan worked, the light orb would be quickly retrieved and Shade would be blown up by Megaton Reprime before his Deomorph awakens. Though Megaton Reprime was absorbed, it was still operational inside Shade's body. Solar, Fluffy, Solar Flare, Turbo, Allie, May, and Amorphinism Sunshine entered the memory path and went inside the colorless world, a section where Primus obtained its power from. Turbo and Co. used this place to find Shade's Amorphinism. It turned out to be Gray the Alakazam, or at the very least, a copy who immediately attacked the group after they located him. Sunshine tried to absorb Gray's copy, but Shade, still being alive, prevented such a feat. Shade was soon killed so Sunshine could absorb Gray's copy. Now with their mission accomplished, the group went back to the real world. As Shade was killed inside the memory path, the body of him in the real world was now nothing but a Deomorph, but it had lost its absorption ability now. Now it was time for the last part of the plan, obtaining the last light orb and blowing up Shade's body immediately after the orbs were activated. This plan, however, meant whoever activated the orbs would have no choice but to be caught in the explosion. To prevent any major losses, Albert sacrificed his body so Solar could use it to go inside the real world and activate the orbs by himself. The orbs needed Primus energy to be activated, so Turbo volunteered to help Solar. Speed and Solar Flare left so they wouldn't get caught in the upcoming explosion. Solar quickly obtained the last light orb and activated it with Turbo's help. Then Turbo immediately channeled Primus energy into Megaton Reprime as well, so it would immediately explode. As expected, Solar and Turbo were caught in the explosion, but so was the Deomorph who used to be Shade. After the explosion, Solar Flare was transported to a colorless location. Dialga and Palkia were standing right next to Flare. The two legendaries explained that the light orb's activation restored the power they were unable to use due to the world's rules. Dialga and Palkia had already used their power to erase most of the memory path and all morphinisms as a result, but were unable to end the cycle of rebirth. Dialga and Palkia reformed the original timeline and made heavy changes to it. However, the legendaries didn't erase the timeline Solar Flare lived in, and instead altered some aspects of it. Because without intervention from his timeline, the cycle of rebirth could potentially remain forever. The cycle of rebirth was unable to be erased because the original Sunshine's soul was still missing a piece, such a piece being her existence in the original timeline, which, as the legendaries previously explained, had been fully remade, so Sunshine no longer existed there. Dialga and Palkia told Solar Flare to find the Pokémon who were exclusive to his own timeline. These Pokémon would be the ones that would carry on Solar Flare's objective to end the cycle of rebirth because they would not be tied to the rules of the reformed original timeline. Dialga and Palkia also told Solar Flare that there were some alternate universes where he and everyone he knew had never existed. Pokemon from these other universes could invade the reformed original timeline, as well as Solar Flare's timeline, so Dialga and Palkia told Solar Flare to warn his successors about this possibility, so any invaders would remain inside their respective universes. Now, having finished their talk, Dialga and Palkia sent Solar Flare back to his home timeline. Since then, Solar Flare began his plan with Trace's help, trying to find the right Mons to entrust his objectives to and a way to enter another world. Now that that's over, I would like to thank all of you who watched this far and would like to ask all of you to please like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for how I should do things, to please leave them in the comments below, as I do read them. Now, without further ado, this now concludes the end of Evolution Squad Summary main story. Next video shall begin Evolution Squad Summary after story. See you then!